We may not feel like we have a choice, but it's our sense of not having a choice that gets us into trouble.
Exactly.
I have had two really significant career-threatening injuries in my career. The first was as a freshman in college. I used to play with the mouthpiece, placed right in the lip tissue. And anyways, the short version of that story is my face literally broke. I went from one day kind of being able to play as well as I could at the time, to it not working at all. And then the second time was actually it's been 7 years now, and I was kind of on teaching chops, and I heard something in my mind that took me into the upper register, and my body absolutely sent me a cue not to do it, but I was like, no way, I gotta go for it. So I went for it, and I felt something give way in my throat. It basically says there are two basic human needs. One is attachment, and the other is authenticity. For most of us, if not all of us, at some point we gave up our authenticity in order to maintain attachment relationships. One musician who feels a desire to maintain an important attachment relationship to someone else, and out of that desire to maintain that relationship, they ignore some kind of foundational, authentic cue, and they override it. That's when we injure ourselves. I think that when you're in that mindset and that defense very naturally comes up, you think, well, I'm going to push through this defense, push the wall down, there's nothing that would be more harmful than that.
Welcome back to the show, everybody, to season 3 of Trust the Process. I am so excited to be here with you. It is now actually the official podcast of Musician Unchained, the newest coaching platform for musicians going through injury. And I am just so thrilled to introduce today's guest because this man has influenced my life more than probably any other trumpet teacher I've had in the 12, 13 years I've been a trumpet artist. And in more ways than just on the horn. This man is the guy who I was in his office, if you remember back to season 1 when I told my injury story, and he delineated the causes of my injury and also the causes of what would be my healing, both physically and psychologically from my healing. This man has influenced me in so many beautiful ways. He is also the trumpet player in the Kobe Watkins Group TET and the theory and trumpet professor at Utah Valley University, and someone I've just really grown to have as a mentor in my life, and in my family's life, actually. That's another story for another day. But Dr. Ryan Nielsen, thank you so much for being here. Well, it's my pleasure. Words honestly can't describe how much our friendship and mentorship relationship has influenced my life over the last couple of years. So yeah, totally. So let's just get right into it. You have a video series on your own YouTube channel called Ryan's Trumpet. And this is kind of where I started to get to know your teaching style, but also the types of things that lead to injury. And in that you kind of allude to your own injury that you experienced a couple of years ago. And so if you want to just share the experience of that injury and kind of what led to that and those different types of factors.
Sure. So I have had two really significant career-threatening injuries in my career. The first was as a freshman in college, when I was supposed to be playing principal trumpet on Newell Daly's, one of our shared mentors, one of his amazing pieces of music called Emmanuel. I was supposed to be playing principal trumpet on it, and I used to play with the mouthpiece placed right in the lip tissue. And anyways, the short version of that story is my face literally broke. I went from one day kind of being able to play as well as I could at the time, and to like it not working at all. Like, and so I had to just completely give up my place and I played third trumpet in it and tried to work myself back to a place where I could still participate in those things. But so that was the first time that that I experienced an injury where I had to just start over completely. And we could talk about that to whatever extent feels supportive to you and your community of listeners. And then the second time was actually it's been 7 years now. And we were getting ready to go on tour with the group Tet in 2017, a little mini tour we had coming up. And so we had some performances together, and I was kind of on teaching chops, and I heard something in my mind that took me into the upper register, and I had felt weird all day, and my body absolutely sent me a cue not to do it, but I was like, no way, I got to go for it. So
no trumpet player can relate, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I went for it, and I felt something give way in my throat. It was really weird. And all of a sudden I couldn't play above like the top of the staff, just like that. And so I had to do that tour. In some ways that was an opportunity, as I'll joke with my students sometimes, kind of a gift from the trumpet gods. It was an opportunity. I no longer had access to the upper register, so I had to learn how to create ideas and improvise in ways that were interesting without being able to generate excitement through range or volume, which was actually an amazing opportunity to grow, but incredibly frustrating. And I mean, I truly feel like this last week maybe is the first time since that injury that I started to feel trust in starting notes again.
Really?
So even though I've been performing professionally since then and doing my best to hang on, these injuries are so weird how long it takes to form newer, healthier habits, but we just keep going, either because we're sadomasochistic or I don't know, or just because we have to. So
well, it becomes a thing of necessity. Along. It really becomes a thing of necessity because, I mean, what other options do we have? I think that's part of the reason why mentally an injury can be so debilitating is we kind of feel like we're backed into a corner. And it's interesting that both of your injuries, well, most injuries happen while we're performing. Mine happened in a practice room, but the pivots that we have to make in those performing situations, even though we feel like we're backed into a corner, there's really not any other options that we have. And I feel like people get into trouble when they try to, how do I put this, like get out of that corner in the wrong way, in that we try to make that performing situation work still as much as we can, but sometimes the reality is we have to face the fact that we can't go on in the path that we were going.
Yeah, we have to pivot. I think I understand what you're saying. I would want to get really curious about that word necessity, because my experience was not one of, I guess it was of necessity in the sense that I knew I wanted to keep playing. I knew I wanted to go on that tour still, and that meant there was like necessity as the mother of invention, kind of, right? That old adage. But there is a flip side to it. For me, if I'm just being super honest, like there have been very real periods of time questioning whether or not it was worth it to me, whether or not I wanted to go another path, to just put the trumpet down. I would say those thoughts come up for me at least every year. It's a constant, like, is this really what I want my practice in life to be? And so far that keeps coming back, yes.
Yeah, that's
much
awesome.
to my confusion.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, and one of the things I wanted to explore was kind of, since you have experienced two injuries,
Hmm.
and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if you kind of had that same thought process that you just delineated in your first injury, and maybe had changed through your second injury, of like, maybe it's not a necessity. Um, because what I've seen just in the people I've interviewed and my own
Hmm.
experience, as you well know, we don't feel like we have a choice in those, because of those external pressures, to
Yeah, I would
pivot,
like,
you know?
yeah. Um, I appreciate the way that you phrased that. Um, that we may not feel like we have a choice, but it's our sense of not having a choice that gets us into trouble.
Exactly.
And so it becomes paramount to get curious about and partner with that sense of resistance. So when you have that thing go up that says, I don't have a choice, that's actually a defense. Like something in you has thrown up a very real defense. And I think that when you're in that mindset and that defense very naturally comes up, you think, well, I'm going to push through this defense, I'm going to push the wall down, there's nothing that would be more harmful than that
Right.
in the process. So what I have found has been much more informative and has contributed to my own growth more has been getting curious about what's behind that defense. What is it in me that defense is protecting? Because if I can figure out, like, if this is the defense, if I can figure out what's on the other side of it, what's the value on the other side of that defense that has come up on its own,
That it may be protecting.
that it is protecting,
Yeah.
then that's actually a path to finding out what my psyche or soul or organism, whatever language you love to use to describe your sense of self, that's like a path to understanding what you innately value. And if you can get curious about what you innately value, you can then partner with the defense and gently move towards change,
Okay.
patiently,
Yeah.
deliberately, thoughtfully, calmly, gently, inviting that defense to loosen. And it becomes, for me, it becomes like an actual spiritual practice, like one of gaining self-awareness and of developing compassion for my own life. And that's where those two things intersect for me. Like, it's always been that for me. Music has always been about both the music and what we can call a spiritual practice, even though I recognize that's a potentially loaded term.
Yeah. Well, it's, even it's a personal pursuit. It's a very internal pursuit for me. And definitely I would agree 100% that it's a spiritual pursuit for me. I'm curious if that perspective that you just iterated, how that evolved from one injury to the other.
Hmm.
If you could look back to freshman Ryan and then professional Ryan, and kind of see what were the dots that connected those two experiences in from that mental introspection through the injury experiences, because that's what we really focus here on the show, is that the mental game of injury, what caused it, and how to, you know, use the
Yeah.
mental game to our advantage to prevent further injury.
Yeah, that's a really compelling question. I've never like actually tried to weave those together, surprisingly enough. Man, my memory of freshman Ryan having the injury is, it really was probably closer to what you're speaking to, a sense of necessity. It's like I have to do this. I knew that something had broken because nothing would work, and I knew I had to start over. I think there was just sort of it's so terrifying. It was so terrifying for me as a young musician who fully identified with music as though it were who I was. to have that injury happen was really important, actually. I think for me, when I was 18 years old, just the profound level of insecurity that I felt as a human being, which of course which is probably why most of us pick the trumpet, is not out of this confidence that we get teased for, but out of the insecurity that drives the bravado that pretends to be confident.
Oh my gosh. Never a truer statement has been said on the show.
Yeah, that's right. So for freshman Ryan, it was so scary. It was so terrifying to think that I could lose this thing that I just kind of like put my head down and got through it. There wasn't a whole lot of reflection at that time. But with the second injury at that point, how old would I have been? I was 39. So another 18 plus years, right? And at that point, I had, what comes to mind for me, as you know, is that just a few weeks back, I lost one of my dear mentors, John McNeil.
Yeah.
And at that point, I had already had the chance to study with John. And John planted some of the most important seeds for my creative development of anyone I ever worked with, which I can summarize in one statement that he would often remind me. And it actually in the form of a conversation he would have with his wife, Lolly. Before every gig, John would call her, and he would say, tell me again. And then she would say, this is according to John, and then she would say, be ordinary. What's ordinary to you is who you are. And John was a huge proponent of total self-acceptance, that the path to genuine creative artistry was to be rooted in what was obvious and ordinary to you, and to commit to that and to fully accept it. Because just because it's ordinary to you doesn't mean it's ordinary to me.
True.
And so he would push against, whenever he felt me reaching for something good, he would stop me, because he wanted to get me to my voice. Rooted in a sense of my own ordinariness, which I think is just brilliant. I don't know anyone that talks like this. And so I already had those seeds in place when I experienced the second injury. And so once I realized that I had hurt myself by betraying that principle of trusting the ordinary, because my body absolutely told me not to go for that high note. And I did not embrace that ordinary signal that came from my body. Then I was able to kind of root myself in just fully accepting, well, this is what it is. It wasn't fun. I missed playing my high notes. But I think that's the difference, is that when the goal is no longer to strive, it is no longer to reach, it is no longer to push, but it is to grow deep roots into the soil of your own ordinariness. It's like, oh, well, I could do that. And to fully accept where you are while you're there. I once asked John, we had him out for some master classes once, and I was like the interviewer, and I asked him once, what's the biggest problem facing young musicians today? That was how I opened the interview with him. He goes, that's easy. They try to play well. And I pushed back. I said, of course we do, John.
Of course, yeah.
We want to do a good job. And he said, but that's the whole problem. And I said, okay, what do you mean? He said, well, who tries to play poorly on purpose?
Exactly. See, there you go.
And I said, no one. And he said, well, then it's just extra. It's just a waste of your mental energy. And it's like, you got me.
Wow.
So I think that's the difference when I look at the threads. One, freshman Ryan was put your head down and please don't look out too far, and let's just see if we can fix this problem. But then 39-year-old, for the last 7 years, I've been trying to understand this injury. and what it has meant for me. I've had some horrible playing experiences where I have not been called back to professional circles that started to hire me, and then something related to the injury showed up on a gig, and I've never been called back. And so I know what it's like to have that happen. And then I've had other gigs that have gone really beautifully, and it just, I don't know, I start to relax into trust in the process.
Hey.
So, hey.
There you go. Hey guys, I just want to interrupt the show real quick and just tell you about something I've been working on for a long time that I'm so excited to share with you. Like I've said in the past, you have the potential to make your injury become a benefit to you, an asset to you. But at the same time, I know the feeling of being lost, not knowing who to turn to, where to go, what resources to use, all sorts of things, and also how to reframe the situation, the mental skills that's needed to be able to do that. And so if you are one of those people looking for that resource, that help, that coaching, I want to tell you about something I've been working on, and that is Musician Unchained. Musician Unchained is now the newest coaching platform for musicians going through injury. It is intended to help you view your situation in a way that benefits you and make the changes in your life that you need to become the best version of yourself because of your injury. Your injury being the impetus for that change. I would love to be able to help you in any way that I can, even if that means sending you somewhere else to someone who can better help you. And so if you are interested in working together one-on-one, visit our website, musicianunchained.com/let's hang for more details. All right, let's get back to the show. Well, that's beautiful. I've really enjoyed, just as a side note, I've really enjoyed the different social media posts you've shared about John. Somebody you always talk to me about, but then I just hadn't really looked into
best,
him.
Man.
Just,
he's one of the greatest.
Beautiful comments.
Yeah, one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah,
true goat. Yeah.
Gosh, there's so many places I want to go from here. I'm chewing on that as I'm trying to think of a question to ask you.
Isn't that amazing, though?
Yeah.
I mean, that one thing, if you actually let that sink in, it will transform your life as a musician.
Well, I think, okay, so the natural segue, I think, would be to something that you shared in one of your videos, and this is going to be in the show notes for everybody to watch. I've watched it probably at least 50 times.
Whoa.
And because it's, like I was telling you this the other day, that video, this particular video, was kind of the impetus for the idea of the podcast to come into my mind. Because really, before I ask this question, the performing arts medicine or performing artists' health game has changed quite a bit over the last 30 years. And I've seen a lot of great information. I mean, of course, granted, I didn't learn about any of this information until after my injury, but that's besides the point. A lot of that focus is still on the physical side of like, what are the physical prevention tips or whatever techniques for each instrument, for each artist to keep them healthy. That is so needed, and I'm so grateful that is becoming on the forefront of our discourses as musicians. But I still hadn't found a ton of things that were in line with what we have talked about, what we've worked on together, and what's in this video of the psychological side of what goes into injuring yourself. And I'm talking mostly overuse injuries, anything that happens, while you're playing. Because, I've had people on the show who have gotten hit in the face by a skateboard. There's not much you can do to prevent that. I mean,
yeah,
in the moment,
thing,
different type of thing. But the vast majority of overuse injuries, there is an underlying reason. And something that you say in the video is that if we don't do the work to change not only the culture, but also I'm paraphrasing, but the mindset of the individual musician, even though we may teach them the right pedagogical principles that that will help them prevent injury, and those are working. This is what blew my mind. Even if those are working, eventually, if that inner work has not been done, they could very well end up in the same or a very similar situation of injury. And so I just invite you to kind of dive into that. I know in that video you talk a lot about trauma and how that informs this principle.
Yeah. Well, what immediately comes to mind for me is I've spent the last 4 years like really immersing myself in trying to understand the nature of trauma and on a psychological side. That was my pandemic project that is still going. But one of the brilliant authors that I love is Gabor Mate.
Yeah.
And he frames it so simply and succinctly that for me as a musician, I just immediately recognize what he was talking about. But he basically says there are two basic human needs. One is attachment and the other is authenticity. And so he defines attachment as just like the need to maintain relationships, right? As humans, we need to keep certain relationships just to survive as children. And then authenticity, he defines not as, and that's a dangerous word, I think, today, because that's like all over like social media and there are all these like, be your authentic self and all that.
You do you.
You do you. But when he says authenticity, I love one of his definitions of that resonates with me a lot is it's nothing more or less than the capacity to be aware of what your instincts and feelings are and to act accordingly. It's like that's a really simple definition of authenticity.
Would it be oversimplifying it real quick? Would it be oversimplifying to say that attachment is external and authenticity is internal?
I think that does oversimplify it just a little bit because the nature of the attachment occurs inside of us. Although it is related to an external object, right? So I think it's a yes and kind of thing.
Sure.
It's like we really, as much as we would love to bifurcate our experience into internal and external, I think, as musicians especially, the more we perform with people, the more we become aware of just how connected those two supposedly separate realms are. So I do think that's a little bit of an oversimplification, but maybe a useful one. But the idea then is that for most of us, if not all of us, at some point we gave up our authenticity in order to maintain attachment relationships. So if you think about that in the context of like a common scenario for an injury is like one musician who feels a desire to maintain an important attachment relationship to someone else, be it a teacher or a peer or a colleague. And out of that desire to maintain that relationship, they ignore some kind of foundational, authentic cue and they override it. That's when we injure ourselves, right? It's like when we give up that authentic cue from the body or from the instinct, then we get into trouble. And so I just thought that was such a valuable way to frame it. And it changed the way that I saw myself in those situations. And you can feel it when you're in that mindset where what you're desperate for is maintaining an attachment relationship that you value. And you're performing. For me, my body will go into a fight or flight response. Like I'll finish a solo and my heart will be pounding in my throat. Well, it can only go there if I perceive an actual threat.
Right.
I can only go into that response if I feel a threat to a relationship that I value. And so as I mature, I feel like what my practice is choosing to value my own authenticity. When it comes down to that choice between the two, when you do actually have to make a choice, learning to choose to trust your own intuition is foundational to staying well.
Yeah, holy cow. I mean, it's like, I'm just thinking of conversations I've had with some trumpet peers. Well, not just trumpet, but I mean, I've given some clinics I've been fortunate enough to give some clinics in different like summer camps and things like that over the last year. And I can see when I teach that principle to them, I can see the fear in their eyes. like especially in their, when they're doing all these rehearsals and, performing at the end of the week. I mean, it's a fun time, you get to perform with all these people, but you can see like when I tell them to either listen to their body or trust their intuition or be, that teaching that principle of authenticity, I can always see their eyes just say like, but
Yeah.
I'm Principal Horn, or I had this one high schooler just say like, I feel all this pressure because I'm Principal Horn in this group, and I'm afraid of like I really want to do well, and so I have to keep practicing. I have to practice as much as I can to be the best. I'm going to put this in air quotes, best version of yourself, of a musician, dare I say, and so where I'm going with this, right?
Totally.
How do you help your students, and you can include me in that camp, to really just like anchor themselves into that? Because I've even talked to like freelance musicians where they don't have another source of income, to supplement, like if they have to go off the horn for a little bit, how do you have those conversations with those people?
I mean, so it really is a case by case basis for sure.
Sure.
I would like, if we start with the example of the high school Principal Horn who has to be the best. I mean, I hope someone can just give him a hug and let him know that they're okay. Just like they need to watch Mr. Rogers,
I think the world needs to watch Mr.
Rogers. And let them know the world needs to watch Mr. Rogers. But the process gets hard and gets in an important way, in a beautiful way, gets hard, is that the path to maturing is, yes, recognized. Like they said, like the example you used, they said there's so much pressure. And they may have been taught that pressure. They may have even been taught that pressure under threat or penalty of the removal of affection. There could be real consequences that they've experienced in the culture of their upbringing where they lost actual loving acceptance over a performance, because our culture is
toxic,
really it's very toxic. So there's so many things. Anyways, but, and this is where it gets really challenging. How do you, on the one hand, completely validate the toxicity of that environment while simultaneously recognizing that if you feel those pressures, you are colluding with them?
You're feeding into it.
You are participating in that. Then we go back to where we started this conversation. Why does that feel like such an urgent defense? What is behind that you are protecting? And how can you partner with that so that it trusts you to keep it well? That's a completely different thing, and it is not easy. And it's really hard in this culture because we're obsessed with blame, and we're obsessed with, we're rightfully, importantly having really urgently needed conversations about the kinds of behavior that harm other people.
Yeah.
But I do not know a single person who has come into healing of any kind without finding a path to reclaiming their sovereignty, which means figuring out how they are colluding with the things that are hurting them and taking ownership of that in a loving, compassionate way and moving forward. It's so hard to even talk about because our culture is, there will be people who heard me just say what I just said, and they will, honest to goodness, they will think I just said it's their fault. And that's not at all what I'm saying. Not even kind of. But if they want to find a path to their own sovereignty in their own well-being, they're going to have to wrestle with what's going on inside them that is participating in creating that. It's not simple. This is like grown-ass people. This is real what we have to do. So
I'm just thinking, like, everybody who's going to be listening to this is just going to be rewinding that last 15 minutes, really, because I don't know if I've ever heard this talked about. I know we've had conversations like this personally, but within the greater musical world, or sphere, whatever you want to call it, our community, I don't know if I've ever heard a conversation go that deep into what needs to change internally, or what needs to be recognized, maybe is a better way to put it. Become aware of, I'll just say as an injury prevention and recovery tool, right? Mm-hmm. And just for those who even haven't gotten through injury yet, as a tool for them as well. So how do you start a conversation like that with a student? Like, let's say, I'll throw myself under the bus. When I came into your office and you saw all those types of things within me in their own way, and, my situation's not like everybody's, obviously, but I'm just curious, and maybe you want to direct your answer a different way, but what was going through your mind of, like, this is what this person needs to hear and implement in order to start on that journey of self-discovery, or however you want to frame it?
In your particular case, is that what you want me to speak to?
Well, I was saying maybe as an example,
Yeah. It was immediately, I would say, with the vast majority of the students who come to me with injuries. I keep saying energy, with injuries.
Goes into it too.
Yeah, that's right. The vast majority of the time, and I think this might be kind of endemic to the Intermountain West, honestly. It's very clear that person has handed their internal rudder over to an external source. Most of the time. So it was very clear for me, for example, when you came in, that I needed to find some sort of non-rational, because you are a thinker. You go way rational. That's your defense. I immediately recognize that, because guess who else? Guess who has two thumbs, and also that's their defense? This guy. So I'm very quick to intellectualize as a defense, and that's not a bad thing. It's just something that I do too. So I immediately recognize that, and I recognize the need to find a way to get you to risk trusting that there was something innate to you that you could fall into trusting, so that you could return the central locus of power to yourself. Because you absolutely had handed it out to other people. And I think as a young adult, at least for me, and I mean, I'm coming up on my 20th year of teaching full time. I've been working with young adults for a long time. I think that everyone's kind of terrified that there's not enough in them, that they have to find the answers out there. And so I feel like a lot of the time, my job as a teacher is to try and root my students into trusting their own authenticity, their own inner rudder, their own central locus of power, because they've been groomed. Maybe that's a little too harsh of a word, but they've been trained or cultivated or brought up in ways where they have been coaxed into, and sometimes coerced into, handing that authority over. And And so to me, I find that language, it can often be, I'll either use some language or none. So if you think back on our lessons together, sometimes I would just stop talking and just have us do call and response so that we couldn't talk about it. And other times, I would use metaphor, basically, right?
Yeah.
Gardens and those kinds of things, right?
That's where that came from. That little plant.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. It's like we need images. Images return because we relate to images based on our own internal center. So I feel like imagery is incredibly powerful. And then sometimes, to your point, like the physical side it's equally crucial. Like I know that there will be some people listening to what I just said. It's like, oh, that's too
deep.
Not too deep, but like I've had colleagues who I respect and admire absolutely criticize me for the non-rational, intuitive approach that I take to teaching, and I respect those criticisms. And I have gone to, like, I think both of us went to Brad Good for help when we were injured, and he's the man. He's incredible.
Totally.
And he helped me so much on the physical side in my recovery. And at the same time, the piece of the discussion that I do not hear happening is the profound importance of having a non-rational, intuitive connection to your own inner authority, which does not behave according to rational anything.
No.
Because it's interested in your total growth. And there's nothing rational, in my opinion, about the total growth of a human psyche or consciousness or soul, spirit. Like it's not a rational process. So rediscovering language that allows us to intuitively relate to that inner authority and that returns it to the practitioner feels central to what I try to do. And I'll either do that through specific use of language. Like sometimes let's do, like if a student said, I feel so much pressure, then I would probably say something like, oh, let's get curious about that word pressure together. What do you mean? And pretty soon I'll just I feel like I'm catching butterflies. They'll say things and I'll say, I just heard you say this. Is that accurate? And they'll go, oh, no. Or they'll say, yeah, that's it. Right? And it's like this game of just like, let's just get gently curious together without any moralizing, without any sense of judgment in that concrete way that just allows for a gentle space to get curious together. Curiosity and play are the antithesis of trauma. The nervous system cannot be in a state of activation and simultaneously be in a state of play and curiosity. It can't. So the game is a game.
Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the show. I just wanted to jump in here real quick and tell you about something that I'm really, really excited about. For a while now, I have wanted to create an even more effective resource than just the podcast that injured musicians can go to receive the support that they need. And recently I did just that. So write this down. Trust the Process Podcast Injured Musician Support Group. I know it's a long title. We're still working on that part. But this is a place where people can go now, injured musicians and even musicians who have gone through injury in the past, and people that help musicians go through injury, where they can go to receive the support that they need, whether that be ask questions, share their victories, share their frustrations, and overall just receive the community and the support that they need in a very proactive, intentional way. And so I just ask that you guys support these injured musicians by sharing this group with them, that they can receive the support that they need. Okay, enjoy the rest of the show. Oh my gosh. This is such a full circle. For just a quick timeout, this is such a full circle moment for me. Just hearing all this, it's been, gosh, has it been over a year since we we were in lessons together? That's crazy. Yeah. Over a year and a half now, actually. And it's like I'm back in your office again with you. So there's one last question, kind of on this game of, the game of the inner game of injury and prevention.
Sure.
And stuff, Yeah. That's the next book on the inner game in the inner game series. And it kind of, something you said so beautifully that I could just so relate to so much. And I'm just thinking about 22-year-old Clark in your office, just with this inner anxiety and angst and fear, and I vocalize this to you many times is, when you've gone through an injury, the lack of, I guess the perceived broken trust that you have in yourself and your own ability to do things correctly and healthfully. And, you doubt, like, what have the last 10 years of being a musician even been then, and all this stuff. You say something really beautiful in this video I've already addressed, that our limits are teachers, or that if we can frame our limits as teachers, that is a part of this whole process. And I think that really goes into, helping, like what you were just saying, of helping your students regain that inner trust in themselves and their intuition. Kind of go into, like, what do you mean by your limits are teachers, and how does that feed into what you were just saying?
Yeah, well, I think that, let's see, what comes to mind there is this, like our culture's obsession with striving, which when that's out of balance, when that obsession with striving is out of balance, limits are there to be broken down rather than partnered with. And that's when we risk injury. It's like, truly, when you decide that through an act of will, through sheer will, you're going to push through that boundary today, instead of, again, partnering with, getting curious about, asking that limit, why are you there? What are you protecting? This is definitely a theme in our conversation today. The limits become teachers, because that's where, when you become a really adept practitioner, you live in the ecosystem of the in-between. So biology is a great metaphor for this. Biological evolution does not happen in the center of an ecosystem. It happens where two ecosystems meet and blend. And that's where learning happens for us too. So wherever you experience that limit, if you can skillfully get right close to it and start to ask questions about it and explore above, sorry, my phone's, and if you can partner with that and explore and like from above and below and left and right and behind and through, and you're just living at the limit, not strenuously, but approaching it like there's a folk tale. There's a Japanese folk tale. I'm gonna go all the way non-rational here. So there's a Japanese folk tale about a woman who is given a task. I'll give a very short version of it. She has to go up to the top of a mountain and get a single hair from the crescent moon bear. And when she gets to the top of the mountain, if she goes too aggressively towards the crescent moon bear, she'll be eaten. So it's high stakes. So, and in our conversation, that would be an injury, right? So she spends days gradually moving slower, closer to the bear's den, leaving food out for it, right? And it goes through all of these things that she does in order to very gradually get curious about this limit, until she's able to ask the bear for one of its crescent moon hairs, and she's able to obtain it. And then when she returns to fulfill the task that she was supposed to do from gaining it, it's one of those stories where it was never about the hair. It was about what she had to develop as a person to get it, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great analogy for this. It's like, absolutely, you walk up to the limit, you have to get curious about it, you partner with it, you let it be there, you don't wish it was different than it was. Because it's a freaking bear. You can't change that.
You won't win against the bear.
You won't win against the bear. That's right. So it's like, so that gradual, gentle process of kind of courting that limit, and until finally you learn from it. On a very practical version of that story is an experience that I had with Sam Palafian, another great mentor of mine who passed away a few years ago. The thing about Sam's teaching, it was insane what he could do. He was just this crazy coach. It was unbelievable to watch him. And my experience of working with Sam would be like, he'd be like, okay, what do you want to work on? And I only had like 2 lessons with him. I used to go hang out with his group teaching all the time, but I only had a couple of private lessons with him. And he'd ask me what I want to work on, and I would tell him, and I'd play for him. And then he would just design this thing where I would find myself gently bumping into the edge of what I was capable of and failing over and over and over again. And he would just let me fail. There was no pressure not to. And and then all of a sudden he would say like 3 words and I'd be like, boom. And all of a sudden I was standing on the other side of the limit, holding a new skill in hand. And so that's like it's like that sense of just gently bumping into the edge of what you can do and not wishing it was different. And then all of a sudden, just one little tweak.
You're one little
bang,
tweak away. Yeah.
You're right over the edge of that former limit. And it is the limit that is the teacher.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
That's what I mean.
No, and that's so beautiful. One of the things that you also say is that limits are teachers that we grow beyond. And it's just, I mean, it's so beautifully put. I mean, everybody should just go watch that video and memorize it. Man, this is a game-changing episode. Like, I hope everybody listening feels that too, because like I said, this is just not talked about. I'm so excited that we're finally talking here, Ryan, because this is what I feel like every time I've gone to a clinic about injury prevention at whatever conference, or, it's just like, this is the one piece that if we just talked about more, hence the reason for this podcast, honestly, then it would just, I mean, it's like, what's the analogy? It's like, do you build a guardrail on the edge of the cliff, or an ambulance in the valley?
Sure. Yeah.
And, it's like, no, we need more ambulances in the valley, or you could just build a guardrail.
Yeah.
So,
and there really are, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that. Reddit. I think that a lot of people really don't want to talk about this because it's not easy to take. It's so much easier to just act like something external was the problem the whole time and place that blame outside. The problem is when we do that, we are handing over our internal authority over our own development.
And your control over your recovery, over your injury. I mean,
totally. And it's an interesting thing, but I'll just say, maybe as an anecdote, like I've proposed presenting on these things to prominent organizations and they don't want to hear it.
Same.
So it's a really interesting thing. It's like, okay, cool. I guess we're just going to keep pretending like that's not a thing to talk about. So I am moving my energies to speaking with organizations that are interested in those topics. So anyways,
cool.
I think you've put your finger on a reticence that speaks to how uncomfortable we are with this.
Yeah. And I'm just going to
professional level.
I'm going to add one thing, my own personal anecdote. It was so funny. I was at a clinic this was 6 months before my injury, given by a very prominent trumpet artist. This person is also a life coach, does a lot of wonderful work in both fields. And I look back at this, my experience in that clinic, because she wasn't necessarily talking as deep as we have, but a lot of the same principles of the, working on that inner musician or that inner self. And I'll be honest, like I just remember sitting there and being like, oh yeah, I'm good. Yeah, this is for people that don't have their crap together. I'm not sugarcoating like that. My own vulnerability coming out on the podcast right
here. You tempted the gods,
and and they're just like, yeah, bet, watch this.
Yeah, exactly. Hold my beer.
And I'm thinking, and I'm like, if I can, as a host and with my guests in a shared effort, to bring this into the forefront, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to take an injury to learn these things, or multiple injuries, heaven forbid, for us to for the light to come on.
But your example is perfect. I love your story because guess what? Sometimes it takes an injury.
Yeah, and it does, and everybody's situation
it's not bad.
Different. Yeah,
it's not. It seems to be the crises that bring us face to face with the teachers that are our limits. So, I mean, yes, injury prevention's beautiful, but I don't think I would change. There are so many things that have come from me grappling with my injury that I would never wish to give away.
Yeah.
They've been so
likewise
meaningful. So it's maybe the injuries, I don't know, man. Trust the process.
Yeah, right.
So.
Before we start wrapping things up, I would be completely remiss if I didn't have you share kind of what you go into in part 2 of that video series on injury. And you do talk about the physical signs, because I remember when we first started working together, or maybe, I don't know if it was when we first started working together, or just there's so many adages, at least in the trumpet world, rest as long as you play, and I mean, things like that, and listen to your body even. And we never really, I mean, at least I had never heard any quantifiable, codified measurements of what that looks like, at least for trumpet players. I mean, I can't speak for any other instrument, but you do go into what you call the 5 steps to injury, or is it 4 or 5, something like that. And
the 5th is injury. Yeah.
Yeah. 5th is injury. There you go. And so if you want to go into that, but also assuming the network of muscles surrounding the embouche is trumpet specific, assume those are working properly and in the way they need to. Kind of what signals from those muscles should we be listening to keep us healthy? Because I think with those 5 steps injury, it's especially talking about the embouchure itself and what you're feeling inside the mouthpiece. But if there's anything with the outer network of muscles that...
Sure. I'm happy to. So here we go into trumpet land.
Yeah.
So the way I teach my students that there's it's the 4-fold path to injury. The first is tingling. So, and especially at the beginning of the day, those first 3 minutes of the day are crucial. So if you play a couple of notes and you stop and tune into your chops and just, I call it listening to your chops, but it's really just sensing how much tingling you feel. Sometimes I'll play 3 notes and my lips are just almost pins and needles, just there's this very active warmth as the blood starts to come to the muscle, right? And so I just ask my students to think of that tingling on a scale of 1 to 10, where a 10 is absolutely pins and needles. And we just are weird. It's our job as trumpet players, we cut the circulation off to the muscles that we're trying to use with a piece of metal. That's whoever thought that up. And why we keep doing it, I'll never understand. But so that's the first one, tingling. So those first few minutes of the day, really check in with your lips. Do not play where there's really activated tingling at first. Later you can, and it won't be a problem. But if I push past that limit of the tingle in the first 3 minutes of the day, I'm going to have a terrible playing day. So that's really important. That's the first. The second one is numbness. And the challenge with numbness, of course, is that if you take the tingling so far that you go numb, you're numb. You can't feel it. So that's really challenging. And then the third one is swelling. And keep in mind at this point, there's a certain level of numbness in the chops. And so we can't feel the swelling. What we feel is that we're suddenly blowing just a little bit harder to try to get response, or we're tonguing just a little bit harder to get response. That little bit harder is a sign that your chops are already swelling. It's whoa, slow down. And then the fourth one, is just pain. That, like, if you go past that, if you play on the swelling, if you keep forcing the chops to respond through blowing harder and all of those things, then you'll probably do something weird that results in some kind of a sharp pain, and then after that is the injury. So those are those. Is that kind of what you wanted me to speak to there?
Yeah, I mean, just...
And then as far as the external muscles go, we want to play until we feel that they're active, that they're like, it's okay to feel like you've done something. But my favorite advice as far as the muscles around the face really is a Bud Herseth thing that Newell Daly told me, which is just that you stop playing when you feel great. So we don't ever want to take the face to the point of total failure. If you take your face to the point of total failure, especially as you get older, you'll probably need a whole day of rest to make up for that. You know, people will say, but weightlifters take their muscles to total failure. Yeah, and the ones who get better lift 2 to 3 times a week. And they're also not trying to develop endurance.
And they're also bigger muscles.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so many reasons that analogy just is dangerous. So for us as trumpet players, the bottom line is, don't think of yourself as a training. In my opinion, I don't think I got to be careful how I say this stuff. For most trumpeters, thinking of yourself as a strength athlete or even as an endurance athlete can be dangerous. I'd rather that my students thought of themselves as people who were obsessed with beautiful sound, because if there's beautiful sound, there's efficiency. And if there's efficiency, there's well-being.
All I wanted to get from that, okay. There's a reason why I asked that at the end and not at the beginning, because like I said before, we talk so much about, the physical side, but very rarely talk about the, what we spent the bulk of our conversation on.
And then I'll just speak to 2 other trumpet-specific injury things. The single most common source of injury is placing the mouthpiece too low. If the mouthpiece is in the lip tissue, you're going to hurt yourself. I do not know any exceptions to that. And then the other thing that I would say is, remember that the amount of firmness that you create with the muscles on the teeth must be proportionate to the pressure that you use. So my favorite phrase for that is by Wifrud. He calls it mouthpiece connection, which is a much healthier term than mouthpiece pressure. So if you increase pressure, you increase pucker, as my mentor Dave Hickman would say. Yeah. So those are 2 other very important keys to preventing injury on the trumpet.
Mm-hmm. And you do go into that, especially, my favorite pedagogical videos on your channel are actually the ones regarding breathing and how to reconceptualize how breathing works in the body. I'll just
game changers for me.
I'll give a hint to everybody who's not seen this or experienced this, but exhalation is relaxation.
That's all it is. That's it.
That's all it is.
That's the mantra.
Yep. And that'll be on our line of t-shirts coming. I'm just kidding. So last question I have for you before we wrap things up, because you've already answered a lot of them, but what is a strategy that you can share with other fellow educators? Thinking about all the things that we've talked about, if you could boil it down to maybe one strategy that they can use in the lesson studio with their students, talking about not necessarily pedagogical stuff, but the psychological side.
Oh man, that's a really big question. All the things we've talked about can be taught, right? Obviously, or we wouldn't be talking about them. So I think these are things that are important to talk about. I think that it's really important to say out loud that what we do together in lessons, things that we're either good at or not good at, are not reflections of our innate talent or worth. It's just a reflection of whether or not we've done it a lot. And so, while we do need to teach our students to be able to speak a shared kind of language. And I immediately think of Brad Good. I know he hates the language metaphor, but I'm going to hang with it for a little bit. What we're basically doing is trying to get our students to a point where they can speak French with people who speak French, right? And there are expectations to be able to communicate in professional circles that way. But those have nothing to do with your innate artistry other than that they allow you to share it with others. So it's important to be able to speak English if you want to share in a dialogue with another person who speaks English. That's how I think of what I do. And so the more that we can move towards language that does not apply some kind of moralized judgment on what our students do. For example, when we say, oh, that's flat, you probably just created resistance in that student's capacity to learn. That will come across as a judgment. But if you say, can you hear that your pitch is a little lower than mine?
That puts the ball in their court.
100%. They're like, oh, I didn't notice that. Let me try again. Bang. It's a completely different thing, because instead of it being good or bad, it's like, let's tell the truth. Like, let's actually speak to the actual phenomenon that's happening. And I love an author named Marshall Rosenberg who developed a system of communication he calls nonviolent communication. I found that to be very important for me, especially because a lot of people perceive me as being very intense, and I've had to practice a lot finding language that helps them realize that I'm not feeling the way that I often come across, and that allows them like a gentle space to explore change. So if that's probably as good a starting point for pedagogy as I could invite people to, like, really think about the words that we're using. And when you say that was good, or that was bad, that doesn't mean anything at all. But I can say, did you hear how much more resonant that was than last time?
You're not giving a moral charge to it. You're anchoring it in pedagogical principles that they can recognize. I'm
anchoring it in the hearing that I want them to develop.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Whew. So,
man, maybe we could go a whole nother hour. We could talk about all this
There's
stuff.
Plenty to talk about.
Plenty to talk about. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for being willing to do this, man. I mean, this is, like I said, a full circle moment for me. And I mean, the reason that these conversations are happening on this show is largely in part due to the conversations we had in that office there, which I will forever be grateful for.
It's a pleasure for me, Clark. Yeah.
My last questions that I like to ask the guests, and you've already answered one of them. One of the reasons why I do a podcast is because of a podcast in which I actually came across Brad Good doing an interview talking about his injury, and I was able to talk to him at a conference and connect with him. And I basically just asked him, like, what can you tell me? Like, what can I do? What advice do you have for me? And so if there's if you could boil it down to one piece of advice that you would tell that person that came up to you saying, hey, I listened to your conversation with Clark on the podcast. Mm-hmm. I'm going through an injury, and it could be like a cellist or somebody. Mm-hmm. What would be that one piece of advice?
This is an extraordinary opportunity to encounter yourself as being much bigger than music. This is an amazing opportunity to experience an innate wholeness that goes so far beyond something that you do, like music. And if you partner with this process in that way, you will learn really meaningful, beautiful things about yourself.
Partner with your injury, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's that limit again.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Whew. Well, thank you so much.
That would be my advice. Yep.
Yeah. And I know somebody listening out there is just having their mind blown right now. And the connections are being made, and for that they will be forever grateful. And the last question I asked, and you've already answered this, I don't know if there's anything you want to elaborate on, but if you could time travel back to those 2 injuries, and you had the opportunity to either take it away or leave it there, or change anything, I'll put that in there for you because you've already kind of articulated that, but if you could change anything about those experiences, would you?
I don't know. I don't feel like, I personally am not drawn to like any sense of fatedness in those. But I also feel like a growing emergent trust in the way things have happened. So, yeah, I don't know that I would. I mean, the first injury led to my first lesson with Newell Daly.
Oh man.
whose connection, like, we've had an orbit with each other that is inexplicably, just unusually beautiful, and I've loved it. And maybe that, I don't know. I would not want to give up that, for sure.
And I'm in a similar situation with him as well.
Yeah, and then the second one had led, like, honestly, in the long term, led to these things. I mean, I'm now like training in an approach to the healing of developmental trauma that feels really beautiful to me. It's called Body Dreaming. It was created by a brilliant therapist in Ireland by the name of Marion Dunlay. I'm actually going to do my first in-person training with her at the end of this month.
Cool.
Anyways, there's so many beautiful things that have come from it. And it's not that I do not subscribe to the idea that bad things happen. I just don't know that they're fated, but I do feel a profound sense of awareness that they can always become opportunities to create meaning. A creative approach to those events can create really important growth. So, yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, I don't know, man.
Well,
and then just, if you're out there and you're struggling with the injury, and if I can support you in any way, I'm just, as John and McNeil and I would often say, I'm just an email away. So shoot me an email. I'm at rnielsen@uvu.edu, or you can find me on YouTube at Ryan's Trumpet, or hit my website, which is ryanstrumpet.com. If I can support you, as I say to my students, if I can support you in a way that does not remove my balance with my family life, I will. So
there you go. That's awesome. Man, I'm going to be thinking about this one for a while. To everybody out there in podcast land, I don't know. I don't need to tell you to share this one. I know you're going to be sharing it with everybody. There are musicians and non-musicians who needed to hear this today. And I would invite you to share it with every one of them. And if you want to share with me how this episode has impacted you, go ahead and send me a text in each audio version of the podcast. And so in Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or any of those audio platforms, there's a little link that says send me a text, or send us a text. I'd love to hear from you, where you're listening from, how this has impacted you. And we do a lot. Our passion is serving you and helping you to make those connections that we've made today. And if you are feeling that and want to support the show in any way, check out the link below to support the show, to help us keep getting this content going. And so, like I always say, keep on keeping on, everybody, and keep trusting the process. Until next time. Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode of Trust the Process, the official podcast of Musician Unchained, the newest coaching program dedicated to helping musicians navigate and overcome injury. But before you go, I have a few quick ways you can stay connected and support our growing community. First of all, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me a text with the link below and share your thoughts, questions, or just say hi. You can also check the show out on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. We also would love to see you in our Facebook support group, Trust the Process Podcast Injured Musician Support Group. If you found value in today's episode, consider making a donation to support our mission of empowering musicians worldwide. Every contribution helps us create more content and resources for you, so visit link number 2 below to support the mission. If you decide to donate, I'll send you my newest resource, the Injured Musician Toolkit, which is an ebook designed to give you tools to help you get through your injury. Subscribe to our newsletter to get exclusive insights, tips, sneak previews of episodes, and announcements straight to your inbox. Act now and I will send you a free gift. So sign up at www.musicianunchained.com/newsletter. And if you or someone you know would like to go deeper with me in the topics of injury and mindset, head over back to musicianunchained.com and check out the Let's Hang tab. As always, I want to thank Daniel Baldwin, my audio engineer, and my sister Dana Lovell for her help with the promotional materials. There is no podcast without them. But before I go, I want to tell you how much I deeply appreciate your time and support. You are not alone on this journey. There are musicians and educators out there who need this resource, and we need to get it to them. Together, we are breaking the chain of old habits and thought patterns that don't serve us anymore, and unchaining the potential within ourselves to face each challenge with strength and resilience. So, as I always say, keep on keeping on and keep trusting the process. Until next time.